Welcome back to my channel. So today I had a fun little story for you guys. During this whole exosomes experience, I was debating whether I should tell this story or not, but I thought maybe it might be a good idea for those of you that actually for anybody that is chronically ill. Um, so a few months ago, a couple years ago when the pandemic started, my doctor basically foresaw that we would not be coming into the clinic for the foreseeable future. And she told me to go ahead and buy a blood pressure machine, a pulse ox, which is the thing that they put on your finger to measure your oxygen, which is good for anybody to have, during this COVID pandemic. And just to have, a scale, things like that to record my vitals. Like whenever I had a follow up with her, I could do it over the phone and just give her my vitals. And I've noticed, or I've found these tools to be very handy during this treatment. Well, they should have been very handy and very helpful during my exosomes treatment. But there are certain things that you should know beforehand, before you start, taking your vitals and that kind of thing. And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. And I'll just give you this hopefully quick story that just happened this past week. So, if you've seen my other exosomes updates, I have been feeling pretty bad. I have not had a good or easy time with the exosomes treatment. And, I had read about this just online with general, Googling and, in a Facebook group, but my doctor didn't really tell me what to expect. The consults that I had with other stem cell clinics really didn't tell me what to expect. So I was kind of on my own. And I felt, apart from the neurological issues, I have just felt awful. I've been feeling pretty run down, kind of, I guess like what people would consider brain fog. For me, it feels like I'm just kind of spacey and out of it. And it didn't occur to me, this has been going on for weeks already. So I'm about 2 months out from my exosomes infusions. And it didn't occur to me until this past week to start taking my vitals, or to start taking my blood pressure specifically. Early on, I did take my temperature, especially the days when I was feeling kind of down. And I did notice a slightly elevated temperature. I would go to about 99, and I'm usually like 98, low 98. Sometimes I've been like high 97. But that doesn't really, I feel like that's expected, especially if you're activating your immune system or if you're messing with your immune system in any way. You're probably going to have an elevated temperature. But, this past week, I kind of was feeling, I don't want to say, well, kind of having dizziness. Like some kind of, sometimes if I would like bend over and pick something up, just kind of feeling dizzy and kind of off. And I know that a lot of that is also neurological because I have the light sensitivity, and my light sensitivity can cause this very strange type of dizziness. And if you want more information on that, go to my symptoms playlist and look at my light sensitivity video. I believe there should be another one coming up soon. I'm updating all of my symptoms. That way you guys have sort of the most recent kind of description of what my symptoms are. So, the exosomes have been messing with my nervous system quite a bit, and I figured it was that. But it didn't occur to me until this past week that I should probably start taking my blood pressure. I have had low blood pressure in the past, so I do have kind of a history of low blood pressure, but I was also very thin. I think I was even thinner than I am now, which is excessively thin. And so I was like, hey, I have the blood pressure machine. I have one of those little like square ones where you press a button and then, you have the cuff and it inflates the cuff. And I was like, I have it. I might as well use it. And so I started using it, and I would get a decent reading. I would notice it, like I would get a decent reading in the morning. And then like as the day would go on, it was just getting lower and lower and lower. And so I think it was like Wednesday and Thursday of this week. Wednesday night I was getting insane, like very low readings, and then Thursday it was like 50s, 40s, maybe 70s, high 70s at the most. And I was starting to freak out because a lot of my symptoms did kind of match up with low blood pressure symptoms. So if you've never, well, I've never experienced low blood pressure symptoms even when I did have low blood pressure. So that's why now I was like, okay, maybe this is just extreme and that's why I'm feeling it. But low blood pressure symptoms can include dizziness, feeling tired. What was the other one? I guess like feeling spacey, I guess would be one. And then I had the other one. Oh, nausea. And as I mentioned in my other updates, my stomach had been really good. That's the only thing that has been pretty good throughout this whole exosomes thing. But in the last few days, I had been getting kind of some weird nausea. And it didn't feel like it was related to my stomach. It felt maybe just like a general kind of nausea. Not related to anything I was eating or any kind of digestive problem, just this weird type of nausea. And so everything just kind of lined up like too perfectly. And I was like, oh no, this must be a blood pressure issue, especially given how garbage I was feeling. And, I've had some days where I was just so tired that it was so difficult to fight that feeling of being tired, which I usually can, but for whatever reason, it's a tiredness. It's a fatigue that you just can't really, like, you just have to go to bed. And so I saw the blood pressure readings. I was using the cuff that came with the blood pressure machine, which is a large cuff. And as you can see, I'm not a large person. But I was getting decent readings. And then it seemed like throughout the day, my blood pressure would just get worse. So finally I think it was on Thursday, I was like, you know what? I'm going to urgent care. But the urgent care that I go to is usually it's 20 minutes away because I really like the doctor there. And I was like, well, what if I pass out? Because that's also another symptom of extremely low blood pressure is blacking out. And I was like, well, what if I black out while I'm driving over there? I mean, it just got so into my head. And I think another thing that was playing into this was the anxiety. If you've seen my most recent update on exosomes, the treatment has not been going great. I have been feeling awful, and I think it's also affecting my anxiety a lot, and it's making me more anxious. And so it was almost like my mind was playing tricks on me. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to urgent care, but I'm going to go to the one right down the street. And all they have there is PAs. They don't have doctors, but I was like, I don't care. All I need is for them to give me a blood pressure reading. All I want is to get a good blood pressure reading, and that's it. So I go in, and the wait wasn't that long. And the first thing they do is they take your vitals, and my blood pressure was like 107, which is like perfect. And I was just like, okay. I still had to wait and see one of the PAs. And that was, that's another story for another time. But they did use a child cuff. And I am well aware. And this is a child cuff, by the way. This is what a child cuff looks like. It's smaller. It's not like, it doesn't have that little ring where you have to actually put the sleeve through and tighten it. It's just small, and it's Velcro-y, and it's just a tiny little cuff or a tiny little arm. And I'm well aware of this issue because everywhere that I go, any clinic that I go to, the first thing I'll tell them is you're going to need to use a child's cuff because I'm really skinny and the big one is not going to register my blood pressure properly. And if they have one, they use it. If they don't have one, then they try to figure it out. But my machine came with a large cuff, so I've been using a large cuff, and I've been able to get decent readings in the past. Granted, I was doing one reading like every so many months because I never used the blood pressure monitor because I just didn't feel I needed to. So, I knew that it was my error because it was, the equipment that I had on hand that wasn't doing it properly. But for whatever reason, I think I just got very swept up in, I guess, the way that I was feeling, and I was like, no, I need to get this checked. But my blood pressure's fine, my oxygen levels are fine. My weight is a little bit on the lower side, but again, it's not extreme weight loss. I mean, I'm underweight as it is. But the reason I wanted to make this video is for those of us who are taking our own vitals at home, especially during this pandemic, because we're not going into a clinic. Make sure that you have the right equipment. Make sure that you have the right size for you. And this is not exclusive to being skinny. I did use the child cuff on my dad, and it showed that his blood pressure was higher than with the adult cuff. So you need to find the right cuff for your size. If you're really thin like me, excessively thin, you need a child's cuff. And the funny part was that the adult cuff actually tightens. It tightens so much that it actually left me bruised on my arm. I mean, it tightens really, really tight on your arm. And so I couldn't believe that it wasn't registering the proper numbers, given that it tightened so tight on my arm. But I think a lot of it also has to do with the width of the cuff. If your arm is so skinny, it doesn't need much width to register your blood pressure. And it's funny because this one is even more comfortable than the other one, and it's given me a decent reading every single time I've used it. So you do have to make sure that you have the right cuff for your size. If you're on the bigger side, make sure you get a big enough cuff, or else you're going to be registering the wrong blood pressure. And also kind of take into consideration your history. I did have low blood pressure when I was really, really thin after antibiotics, but it normalized after my first round of IVIG, and my blood pressure normalized and stayed normal ever since then. So that's been since like 2014. And I've had decent blood pressure ever since. So I think it's really important that you have the right equipment. Make sure that your equipment isn't broken. Make sure that your batteries are fresh. Because at first I thought it might have been the batteries, but I had just put fresh batteries in the machine. So the machine was fine. It's essential, because especially if you're doing experimental treatments like exosomes, like stem cells, even something like IVIG. IVIG is known to raise your blood pressure. And it's happened to me as well. Like I've had that weird, it causes like a very strange headache if you're infusing it too quickly. And that's when you have to tell the nurse, like, hey, you need to slow it down, or can you take my blood pressure because I'm feeling weird. So there are a lot of medications and treatments that are known to mess with your blood pressure. I believe plasmapheresis, which is another treatment for stiff person syndrome, can reduce your blood pressure. It can make your blood pressure kind of get really low, because they're removing, I think they're removing a large quantity of blood. And so that can also be an issue. And I think that's why me and my doctors have sort of stayed away from plasmapheresis, because I do kind of have that little bit of history of having low blood pressure. And my blood pressure is normal. It's usually in the hundreds. But again, can it cause it to tank? I'm not a big person. Taking out any amount of blood may cause it to go down quite a bit. So those are things to consider, and your vitals are very important, but it's also important to have the right equipment, because it can really scare the crap out of you. My mom was terrified, because my mom has hypertension. And so for her, even a blood pressure of 100 is scary for her, because her blood pressure has always been like insanely high. But when she saw like 40 and 50, she was just like, this is like, how are you even still alive right now? And she was like, yeah, you really need to go get it checked, because that's just not normal. So yeah, it's very, very important not to scare yourself either, because that type of stress is not good for you, especially when you're already under enough stress. But like I said, it was almost like all of my symptoms and all of the weird things that I was feeling just lined up too perfectly with, you know, with the blood pressure readings, I guess. I mean, if you have blood pressure in the 40s and 50s, you're probably dead. It's not really, you know, maybe low 80s is probably more realistic for a low blood pressure reading for me, or a symptomatic low blood pressure reading. But 40s and 50s is like fatal. I mean, that's not good. You can actually go into shock from something like that. And I started feeling like I was kind of like going into shock, and I was like, you know what? Relax, go to the doctors, have them run your blood pressure, because, you know, it's got to be an error on, you know, my end. And and again, I knew this the whole time. I'm always bugging, you know, nurses to use the right blood pressure cuff, because my arm is really skinny, and yet I didn't have the right size. But I bought the right size, and literally as soon as I got the child cuff, I've been having great readings. So I thought this would be a good PSA for those of us that are taking our own vitals. I know there's some people that have to take their vitals every single day because they do have things like POTS, or, you know, diabetes, which, you know, you have to do your blood sugar and stuff. But I'm not one of those people that really has to take vitals all the time. It just dawned on me to do that because of the way that I was feeling, and my vitals are fine. I've been taking my temperature. My temperature's fine. Everything is literally fine. I just feel like absolute garbage. So, yeah, be very careful with that. I thought this would be a funny video to make. It wasn't funny at the time, but I'm laughing about it now. And I did know. I mean, I knew that it had to be something on my end. There's no way I could have had a blood pressure of like 40 and still be alive. Um, but yeah, be very careful with that. So that's what I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoy this video and laugh at it, because I am laughing at it now. And yeah, hopefully this will be helpful for anybody that decides to undergo these kind of experimental treatments. Yeah, keep an eye on your vitals. And if your vitals are fine, I would say you're probably okay. It's probably just the treatment doing whatever it's doing in your body. So that's what I got. Take care.